people think about winning with negotiation. And when you are thinking about winning, by default, somebody has to lose. And so if that's the case, you want to make sure you're not the one that's losing. You want to make sure you're the one that's winning. And so there is an inherent thought process that goes along with that, because you want to win and you want to do it at all costs and you don't want to be the loser in all of this. And so as a result of that, the language you use, the way you handle yourself, the way you defend yourself could come across as really competitive. But that actually isn't the definition of negotiation. Negotiation is just two people trying to reach an agreement. And so if you can think about it more collaboratively and remove that element of winning from the equation, you can affect the person sitting across from you as well. They can start to mirror your behavior too. But if you're going in there thinking about it competitively, guess what the result is going to be? Someone's going to win and someone's going to lose, and no one wants to feel like a loser.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jay Scherr, host of Business Minds Coffee Chat, where you get a captivating look inside the minds of game changers, risk takers, and visionaries who turn ideas into breakthroughs that shake up the world. Our mission is to give you fresh ways to think that spark growth in your business and life so you can make a mark that lasts. I thought a good starting point would be for you to share this with us. If you were to write your autobiography, what would be an appropriate title for that book?
Oh, no one's asked me that question before. I mean, Big Fat Greek Negotiations is one of the silliest things that comes to mind.
Okay.
I mean, from household to corporate boardroom, those are the types of scenarios that my origin story really that got me to where I am today. It sounds bizarre, but that's how silly everything really started.
Okay, so let's wind the clock back a bit then. So talk then about your origin story. Give us maybe a peek behind the curtains of what life was like for you in the early years growing up. So mom and dad, you have a sister. Mm-hmm. And what was family life like, and what kind of child were you?
So my parents consider me the rebellious one, even though my rebellion was like wanting to go away to university. Like, wow, real problem child there. Right. So we grew up in a very strict immigrant household. I had an older sister who does not like conflict. So all of those stereotypes about, oh, it should be easier for the younger one. It was almost like the expectations were so far off from my parents. They were like, why can't you be as easy as your sister was? So I was constantly deemed the rebellious one who wanted to do things outside of the strict rules that we grew up in. So anytime I wanted to do something, like even if it was go to prom or join an after school activity, you really needed to build a case for it. And I also learned by osmosis watching my dad negotiate. My sister and I were very involved in the business. We were the ones writing his invoices. I used to go on the road with him. He had a coffee business for a long time where he was a wholesaler. So he would deliver coffee to all of the local restaurants, and we would load the boxes and go into the kitchens with them, and I'd be listening to him talking to other business owners. So I always had a desire to work and make money. Like because we were there by our parents' side, after school, we'd go to the current restaurant of the moment, because we were that family too, where we always had a restaurant. We never went home. So we saw how hard they worked, and that's something that I really wanted to do as well. So I got a job immediately as soon as I was allowed to, as soon as I could walk to my job after school instead of having to go home or to the restaurant. And I started selling leather coats at a local retailer. And then a year after that, my dad said, so I need you to quit your job next month. And I said, why? He said, well, we're opening up our own leather store. And I said, what do you know about leather? Because we came from the food business. And he said, I know I have a smart kid. Like, why should you be making money for someone else? Because I was making great commissions. I was, pulling in some great money. And he was like, well, let's use this. And so I got into business immediately. I have this history of being thrown off the deep end over and over and over again. And I just kind of went with it because I assumed that was normal. And these difficult conversations that I watched my dad have at the bank or with the manufacturers that we were picking out and so on, that just became my normal. So when I joined the corporate world many years later, after deciding small business really wasn't for me, that's going to come back in my face later. I decided I really wanted to join the corporate ranks. I was going to go get an education. That was always part of the journey, was to get higher education. And then when I left the small business world to go into the corporate world, it was normal for me to negotiate my first salary, to negotiate everything I possibly could. Whereas I looked around me and other people weren't doing that. So I felt like I had a really great foundation, even though it came kind of in a strange way of constantly negotiating to get my way out of the house or to break the norms. And I have leveraged that in so many unique ways in my corporate career as well.
Interesting. So watching your father, working with him side by side, seeing him negotiate, having tough conversations. So where did he learn his ability to negotiate, to have those kinds of conversations? Do you know whether he grew up in a household that was similar in nature? Where did that learning come from for him? Or was it just intuitive?
I think part of it is cultural. I do think there's nature and nurture. I do think part of it is cultural. He also grew up in a household where he had to kind of buck the trend, so to speak. He also grew up in the back of a kitchen because my grandfather had a taverna in a village in Greece. And so he was used to, getting in there and getting his hands dirty. He wanted actually higher education, but because my grandfather wanted labor, he wasn't allowed to continue to pursue education. And so I do think culturally it is the norm when you go to a market in Greece. I watched my grandmother on the other side of the family do it. I watched everybody do it. This was the normal thing. You didn't take the first price as the price because that was the cultural norm. But I do think there was an element of, my father has a lot of this intuition about a lot of scenarios. And I think I likely inherited some of that too. Like our gut instincts are calling us in a certain direction. But watching it certainly was informative too, because I watched some mistakes as well and went, that's not going to work in these circumstances, or what worked for him isn't going to work for me. I've got to do things a little bit differently. But there was an element both of nature and nurture, I think, on both sides.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So I grew up in a household with a father who, similar to your father, it seemed like he negotiated everything. And he almost looked at it as kind of a game in a way. And it didn't matter where we were, whether we were in a restaurant and negotiating a bill, whether we were at a store. I watched him do that. And I didn't think that much about it at the time, but later in life, like in my early teens, let's say, when I was around other family members, I noticed that there was a level of discomfort with it. And I started to really pay attention to that. And I even heard a couple comments, unfortunately, they were negative comments made by family members to him that, you're so cheap. Why do you have to negotiate everything? And that really stuck with me, and it really formed a storyline in my own mind that I had to work hard to overcome, because I looked at it at one point with a different meaning attached to it. But then when that happened, right, there was a whole nother meaning attached to it. So I found that interesting. So tell me, so you talked about your dad here. What was one of the most valuable lessons growing up that you took away from your mother that you think about today that still resonates with you?
So it really took me a long time to appreciate how effective a negotiator she really is, because she's more subtle. And so her favorite quote is from that movie, My Big Fat Greek Wedding, where they say that the man is the head of the family, but the woman is the neck. And she totally identifies with that. So she's so subtle in the way that she gets things done. And people love her. Everybody in the community, in our Greek community, everybody at her job, all of my friends adore my mom. And so she just has this natural likability that she carries so well and uses it to get what she needs out of scenarios. She doesn't abuse it, but it's one of those things that people want to do things for her because she's this likable personality. Whereas my dad can be rough around the edges. He can be polarizing. People adore him and other people can be like, stop negotiating with me. My mother is she's really mastered that subtlety of it without, I think, even realizing it.
That's great. So you really have a good blend, or at least saw a good blend of both of those, and which I think is quite amazing to have as role models. So share with me and all of our listeners what one of the most significant defining moments in your life and what did you learn about yourself, and how specifically did that defining moment impact you?
There's been a lot of them over the years, but I would say one of the ones that sticks out to me in my early career was when I was negotiating a salary at a former employer. And I'd worked there already. I had already negotiated my incoming salary, and I was getting a promotion, and it was time for me to negotiate that as well. And I was getting advice from a colleague who was years ahead of me, and he was known as, one of our star national account managers. And we were all confident he was one of the highest paid people at our level doing what he did. So he was walking me through it. He was my mentor, so to speak. And he literally told me word for word what to say when I had the call with HR and with the managers and so on. And it backfired. It backfired enormously. And he was flabbergasted by it. And he said, he told me, I'm so sorry, Fo. Like, I don't, this is exactly what I did. It's exactly how I handled my last one. I don't know what went wrong. I'm so sorry if I gave you bad advice. And when I say it backfired, they threatened to fire me. For negotiating my salary. So I totally understand it when my audience members tell me they're scared to negotiate. I managed to work my way out of it. But it was one of those things I was just as flabbergasted by it, because I finished this conversation with HR and they said, okay, we heard your concerns. We'll take that back. And I promise you I'll get back to you tomorrow. And instead of HR coming back to me tomorrow, it was my VP coming back to me saying, I heard you made these incredible demands. And I go, wait, what? You know me, you know my tone. Do you find it believable that I would be making demands like that? He goes, no, that's why I'm having this conversation with you. And that's why I told them not to fire you, because clearly something is getting broken in this game of telephone. So at least I had his trust to know that whatever happened on that call was not misinterpreted. And it was a very diplomatic call. It was very matter of fact. And I followed my friend's advice, but it just wasn't interpreted that way when it came out of my mouth. And I was also the person who received it. I don't know what was going on with her. She was no longer with the company shortly after that, but I suspect she was probably worried about the repercussions of that request going through to her senior person. So that was a really interesting combination of lessons. One of what do I want out of an employer? Two, how come the negotiation sounded and looked so different for my colleague versus from me? And then how do you get yourself out of these scenarios? How do you deal with that mistrust? And that repair that needs to be done with that relationship as well. Like, I was grateful that my VP trusted me and actually did pick up the conversation. But even that in itself gave me some pause to go, do I really want to continue on here? And how do I manage this relationship going forward?
Yeah. So let's deconstruct that one just a little bit further. Why, since you've got the benefit of perspective now, why did it look different than the person who had shared that technique or had coached you through that? So you had a male who was the one that was sharing that with you. So, and I don't know if that played a role, but what did look different? Why did it look different?
I mean, that was the number one reason it looked different. I am privy to a lot of research nowadays that tells us there's a lot of bias in negotiation. Simply by advocating for oneself, you could be interpreted very different from someone from a different demographic group. And so there was certainly that. I think that was the biggest piece of the equation. I do think also it depended on who was negotiating with whom. So in hindsight, I didn't have a relationship with this HR person, and my friend who had done this exact technique likely had a relationship with the person with whom this worked. And so I was kind of starting much colder than he was starting. In hindsight, I know a lot more about relationships, likability, and building trust and so on. And so I think people who have that likability and that trust are given a little bit more runway. In addition to the bias that was working against me, she wasn't giving me the benefit of the doubt. She was also in a place that clearly from her employment track record after that, when she wasn't there much longer, she must have been either unhappy or uncertain in her career path because she didn't last in that role. So I suspect there's also an element of, well, now I have to take this on because she was a woman. And if she goes to her boss saying, I can't do this within budget, how does that reflect on her? So it wasn't just me, but there was a lot of bias and there was a lot of other people's experiences that were filtering into this one activity that actually affected so many stakeholders.
That is so interesting. So I want to talk more about bias here in just a moment, but I was thinking about the common negotiation myths that some of which I think about. I know you think about this, but I wanted to play a little game here for just a moment because I think this will bring some value to all of those that are watching and listening right now. So here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to just share the myth itself, and then if you could respond to that myth and tell what the actual truth is.
Okay.
Make sense?
I love these games. Yep.
Okay.
Let's go.
So here's the first one. Negotiation is inherently competitive is inherently combative or aggressive.
So that is a myth. And the reason why that the myth of combative negotiations exists is because people think about winning with negotiation. And when you are thinking about winning, by default, somebody has to lose. And so if that's the case, you want to make sure you're not the one that's losing. You want to make sure you're the one that's winning. And so there is an inherent thought process that goes along with that because you want to win and you want to do it at all costs and you don't want to be the loser in all of this. And so as a result of that, the language you use, the way you handle yourself, the way you defend yourself could come across as really competitive. But that actually isn't the definition of negotiation. Negotiation is just two people trying to reach an agreement. That's it. It doesn't mean one person has to win or lose. And so I focus on the collaborative elements of negotiation all the time to try to get people to think about it differently. That doesn't mean that someone else isn't going to come into negotiation thinking about it competitively, and you have to be ready for that. But if you're thinking about it competitively, you're already starting at a really bad point. And so if you can think about it more collaboratively and remove that element of winning from the equation, you can affect the person sitting across from you as well. They can start to mirror your behavior too. But if you're going in there thinking about it competitively, guess what the result is going to be? Someone's going to win and someone's going to lose, and no one wants to feel like a loser.
Yeah, that is so good. Okay, here's the next myth. If I'm nice, I'll lose.
If I'm nice, I'll lose. I guess it depends. Like, it's a really specific language choice there. I think you can be diplomatic. I think you can be kind. I think you can be a number of things. Some people would define nice in different ways. I don't think nice people lose. In fact, I do think that nice people could take over the world because they can be extremely influential. I mean, I talked about my mother earlier, and people think she's a very nice lady and she can get whatever she wants in scenarios. She doesn't push it. I actually have to push her to try and get more sometimes. But no, you can be polite, diplomatic, nice, not rude, any of those things, and you can still get what you want. And in fact, when I do keynotes and stuff, I give loads of examples of that all the time. Nice doesn't mean losing, but you have to be careful that you don't misinterpret nice and get walked all over.
Great point. Okay, very good. By the way, for all of you that are watching and listening right now, please make sure that you're taking notes. You're getting a wealth of information here already, and this is going to continue, and I want to make sure that you're taking advantage of what you're learning here and that you're actually applying the lessons that you're learning. All right, next myth for you. You either have the negotiation gene or you don't.
That's totally untrue. Negotiation is not genetics. You're not born with it. In fact, Carol Dweck, I believe her name was, she wrote a book called The Growth Mindset. And so we have lots of research around when you adopt a growth mindset, you can actually get much better results. And I mean, if my students are any evidence of that, I teach negotiation skills. And when I do teach those full semester 12-week courses, I actually have my students do a reflection paper at the end of the semester, and they tell me who they were at the beginning and who they are at the end. And totally blossom in their negotiation skills. So you don't have to be born with it. You can definitely learn it.
Perfect. I would also say that clearly there isn't necessarily a negotiation gene. If there was, you wouldn't be as busy as you are training corporate executives and leadership teams, et cetera, and speaking about this on a regular basis, and us having this conversation today. So clearly it is a skill set that we can all learn and that we can all improve upon. All right, Nick Smith, silence is weakness.
Oh gosh, that is the biggest misconception ever. Silence is not weakness. Silence can be strength. There's a number of reasons I called my book Say Less, Get More. It's because those moments of silence can be super powerful. Your quiet confidence can scream volumes without you having to say a word. You may have to frame it sometimes. You might have to make sure that they know you're being silent because you want to think, because you're owning the moment. But silence can speak so much more than people thinking and talking at the same time. People often give away their power by talking too much. So we really need to get comfortable with silence, and you'll start to see the evolution of how much more powerful it can be.
So good. You want a couple more?
Yeah, please. I love this.
Okay, great. All right, Nick Smith. You need to have all the answers before negotiating.
That one's untrue. You don't need to have all the answers before negotiating. In fact, part of the conversation, part of the negotiation process is discovering those answers. And so too often we're very quick to start proposal making. I want to get my idea out there, my proposal out there, and then I'll find out information and realize I have to adjust it. So part of the process when I'm working on high stakes negotiations with my clients, and even when they're lower stakes, if it's a salary negotiation, for example, the part of the process that you have to start with is asking great questions and digging up information and doing research. When you don't know those answers to those questions, you keep following up with more information as much as you possibly can. Then you can confirm whether or not that proposal you had in mind is appropriate or not, or if it needs adjusting. But I would rather you do that inside your head versus trying to put the proposal out there and then discovering information along the way. It just changes the dynamic. So one of my philosophies is power first, and power comes from information. So you want to have as much of it as possible before you go in. That's where the myth comes from. But you want to collect as much as you can before your proposal gets out there. Once it gets out there, you're trying to justify why you said this. And if you're just discovering information after that, it can get really dangerous. So discover what you can up front. But if you don't know enough, go in there asking questions some more before you actually put your proposal on the table. So that was a bit of a hairy answer there for you, but absolutely, you don't have to have all the answers. You can say, I don't know, and I'll come back to you on that. That again can make you look really confident, but too often perfection is what people are chasing, and they get no progress as a result. So go in with what you can, find out even more if you can on top of that, and then work with what you got.
Yeah, that's so good. And I am sure in your years of experience that you have been involved in, or at least seen negotiations that fell apart because somebody came in and either made assumptions and had the wrong information, or they just weren't asking questions at all for clarity to understand and then be able to form the basis of their ask or their negotiation. All right, Nick Smith, since we just talked about power, the other person has all the power.
That is so not true.
Tell me more.
So the other person never has all the power. Even if you feel totally powerless, one of the first exercises I do with anybody I talk to is you have to recognize, what do you bring to the table? If you think about power like a battery on a phone, what charges your battery? Why are they talking to you right now? Clearly, they need you if they're giving you the time of day, if they're giving you any of their attention, especially in today's attention-deprived world. Why would they be talking to you if you didn't have some power and if you didn't bring something to the table? They clearly need you. Now, how much they need you will determine how much power one person has over the other. And if you can walk away from this conversation, if you don't need them, well, that is a massively powerful fact. That charges your battery immensely. So you can never go in with the assumption that they have all the power, because the reality is, if they're engaging in this conversation with you, clearly you bring some power to the table.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love this. All right, here is my last myth for you in terms of what I had written down. I'm sure there's many more, and if there is another one that you think is important to bring up, please do so after I go through this last one. Negotiation only happens in boardrooms and in big deals.
So one of the working titles of the book that we didn't go with, I think it ended up on the back cover, was From Boardroom to Bedroom. And that's because negotiations happen everywhere. If you are having to have a conversation with someone because you're not aligned, you're having a negotiation. If you are getting on the subway and you are trying to get more space to stand in, you are having a negotiation with your body language without even saying a word. You're negotiating for your personal space. If you have children, you know that the world's greatest negotiators are children, and they do it all the time.
Oh, yeah.
So we are negotiating all the time. We're negotiating with our families. We're negotiating with our colleagues. We're negotiating with our clients. We're negotiating with the general public. You're negotiating with the barista who is making your coffee sometimes to do it in a way that's going to suit you. These are all very common examples of how we negotiate on a daily basis. And if you can think about how successful you are on those daily basis scenarios, and you carry a little of that into you in the boardroom, it becomes a lot less intimidating in those high stakes scenarios.
Fantastic. Okay, so first of all, I want to make sure that everyone that's watching and listening knows that we are talking about a lot of the details that you're going to find in Say Less, Get More. This is such a fantastic read, and really the way that I look at this book when I was reading through it is it's a toolbox, right? It is a set of tools for each of us to be able to advocate for ourselves, yet also we have a safety net in place, right? The book it's practical, it's real, it's relatable. And you know what's interesting? You and I, obviously, Fotini, we've not had a conversation before. Yet, as we're having this conversation, I feel your energy. I feel your passion. Obviously, I can hear and I can understand your experience and your knowledge. The way that you write is very similar to the way that you speak, the way you present yourself, which I love because now I can take your voice. And as I was doing my due diligence in preparation for today's conversation, obviously I was digging into your content, trying to really put myself as much as I could into your ecosystem. But now I can see you, I can hear you, I can feel that same energy as I'm reading through your book. So thank you for that. And I would encourage everyone to go out and purchase a copy of this book, which we're of course going to provide links in the show notes. So let's continue the conversation here. And everything that we're talking about here really is referenced in the book itself, but I want to help give some additional clarity and context for our audience here. So let's talk about why some people are apprehensive to negotiate. So we've been talking about negotiation. We talked about the common myths. What is it that holds us back in your experience? What are the top things that keep us from negotiating?
Well, I've been fortunate enough that I have been training people for the last 15 years. And every time I do an intimate training where I have a chance to go around the room with folks, I kick off every training with the question, what is your biggest fear about negotiation? And It doesn't matter if you're the CEO or the most junior person in the room. It doesn't matter your demographic and your background. There's two answers that come up every single time. They all come down to these two answers. The first one is our ego. I don't want to look stupid. Because if I look stupid, maybe I won't get to do the next negotiation. Maybe I'll get fired. Maybe they won't give me a great deal. Maybe I'll lose my bonus, whatever. But no one wants to look stupid, and that's human nature, and I totally get that. So sometimes people will refrain from negotiating because it's better than looking stupid. And the other bigger one and more important one for everybody is they don't want to damage relationships. And so if you think back to some of the examples I've talked about, even my first salary negotiation that went wrong, I mean, that could have been detrimental. I could have lost my job. So I understand why people would hold back from that. They're like, well, I don't want them to hate me. I have to work with these people. I have to see these people day in and day out. So how am I going to negotiate with them if it goes badly? If I look stupid, then they won't trust me. And how am I going to continue with them? There's all of these fears, especially if you come from an underprivileged group. Then there's the fear of consequences of retaliation. And we have, unfortunately, a lot of research behind that as well. But there are methods, there are tools, and I tried to load the book full of them that will help you to navigate those scenarios to reduce the risk of looking stupid or damaging relationships.
Okay, so let's go back then to the biases that we see in negotiations. And what I would love for you to touch on, if you will, is how do men and women negotiate differently, and the biases that we see in negotiation, what are the common ones? And then most importantly, what can we do to overcome those biases?
So do men and women negotiate differently? Yes. Theoretically, they do. According to our research, men are far more competitive and women are more collaborative. And that actually means that women are fantastic negotiators, but they don't always do it. Or it sometimes means that even though they are doing it, they are treated differently. The response isn't quite the same. There's some other research around the fact that about who's more emotional in the workplace. And there's a misconception that women are emotional, but the reality is research tells us men are far more emotional. And that emotion that we see is anger. And it's accepted. It's almost like we're cool with men being angry. That's why we're also cool with them being competitive. We're cool with them asking for more. Whereas women, when they ask for more, are perceived as greedy or aggressive or bitchy or any of those things. So we're working against those perceptions when it comes to bias. So those are some of the challenges that we face. However, when you're using cooperative language, when you're using influencing techniques like likability, that reduces the risk of some of that retaliation or that damage to relationships and so on. So there's lots of ways to navigate it. And anytime I've talked to somebody who comes to me and says, I'm really worried about this consequence, or my friend said she had her deal rescinded or something like that, by the time we're done talking, they feel really good about going forward with what it is that they're trying to get. And most people tell me great success stories. The odd time I get someone going, I didn't get what I wanted, but I feel really good about advocating for myself. And there was still no damage done. Like no one hated me. No one rescinded the offer. They just said they couldn't do it. Or, I didn't get what I wanted, but that's okay because no one hated me for it. Those are the types of things, the outcomes that I'm looking for when I instruct people to use the techniques that I've highlighted in the book.
Excellent. So when you're involved in high stakes negotiations, actually, let me back up, whether it's high stakes negotiations or not, what is happening when our emotional states are heightened and we feel that level of stress? What is going on at that juncture? So we walk into a negotiation. Speak a bit about what is affecting our emotional states. But then what can we do to learn to regulate ourselves in the moment so we don't allow that emotional state or stress or whatever it happens to be to derail our ability to be collaborative, ask good questions, and have a successful negotiation?
So when it comes to what's going on in our brains, we're going into that fight, flight, freeze, or fawn mode. And so people are familiar with the term fight or flight. It's the stress part of your brain is going, this is uncomfortable. This is something I don't like. Or maybe there's the odd person, certainly the competitive negotiators who love that kind of stuff. They might be going, yeah, bring it on. And they get really excited. And so they might have very different outcomes. But when you're in that fight or flight mode, what tends to happen is all rational thought leaves your brain. and it goes to your limbs and your heart beats a little bit faster and your palms start to get a little bit sweaty. And if you go back to our cave person ancestry, when we were faced with a stressful moment like those saber-toothed tigers, that's what allowed us to run like hell to get away from those saber-toothed tigers. Today, when negotiation is one of those threats to our ego, because again, we don't want to look stupid and we don't want to damage those relationships. Those are threats that we're facing. Our physiology still works the same way. So our brain gets clouded and all of our blood starts pumping, our heart starts pumping, our breathing gets shallow and so on. And we're not necessarily making the most rational choices. And so what we need to do is find a way to get in charge of those choices. And so you want to find your coping mechanisms in the moment, and again, another one of the many reasons we titled the book, Say Less. Take a moment to say less. Take a moment to take a meditative breath. Leanne Davey actually gave me the advice. She's a psychologist friend of ours. And she said, breathe out everything in your lungs so that's completely empty. So that when you take your next breath in, you're actually taking a deep belly breath. So it's not just the shallow breathing anymore. And that can help, again, oxygenate everything and get your brain functioning the way it needs to. Maybe it's a visualization of some kind, picturing yourself on a beach with a margarita in your hand. Maybe it is just doing what athletes do when they imagine themselves winning, scoring the basket. There's a lot of research around visualization as well, because there's some really interesting stuff by a researcher named Dr. Kelly McGonigal. She wrote a book called The Upside of Stress. Excellent. And she talks about it's the same center of your brain that's handling those stressful moments, but that's also handling those exciting moments. It's that same emotional center. So how can you take this moment that you're facing, instead of being stressed out about it and saying, I worry about damaging this relationship, how can you take that and go, I'm so excited to find a solution that's going to work for both of us. I am so excited to show them all of the research and preparation I've done for this. I'm so excited to show them how capable I am and why I deserve this amazing salary that I'm about to get. And that can quiet that loud part of your emotional center and take that energy and turn it into something productive. We have research around people who tell themselves they're anxious versus people who tell themselves they're excited, and how much better they perform when they do the latter. So how can you change your mindset when you go in? One of those things is taking that calming breath and doing the visualization. But there's things that you can do even before you get in that room. And again, do the visualization beforehand, do the meditative breaths before that. They will have a halo effect. So you're not going to fall into such a deep fight or flight mode if you can do some of these things in advance. I also tell my clients and students, when you're going into a high stakes conversation and you're going to say something that's going to make you uncomfortable because you're worried about damaging the relationships, because you're worried about looking stupid, practice it. Say it out loud first before the spotlight is on you, before the stakes are high, because that will also give your brain some muscle memory. So it's actually not going to go into fight or flight. It's going to go, oh, this is familiar to me. My subconscious has heard or seen this before. So you're preventing yourself from going down that path just by being really well prepared, by saying the words out loud and getting your brain comfortable with them.
Those are so good. What great strategies to use. And many of those I use just on a daily basis, no matter what conversation I'm going into. So I'll give you one example. Prior to recording a podcast of this nature, before I'm walking on a stage or giving a presentation in front of a group, I will find a way to get outside in nature. And it's almost a meditative practice for me. I'll do deep breathing as well, visualization. And before I actually either walk on the stage or start recording the podcast, I'm thinking to myself, how do I want to show up for this person who I'm going to be speaking with, right? And I really try to put myself in that place without putting pressure on me, but I've done the other steps as well, nature, breathing, the visualization, and it really helps to level set myself and put me in a much calmer state. And so thank you for sharing those. I think those are outstanding strategies. So speak to body language, if you will, because you just talked about the power of language, the words that we use, how we speak to ourselves, how we reframe language when we're in front of somebody else, and how powerful that is. Talk for a moment about the importance of body language, both ourselves, how we position ourselves, but then also maybe a few things that we should be looking out for in a negotiation that may be sending us a signal or a sign of some sort.
So, one of my favorite stories to share is how I got my job because of how I walked in a room. So, many years ago, when I was working in consumer goods, I was being trained by a negotiation consulting or negotiation training company. And so 40 of my colleagues and I walked into the hotel lobby, and then we were separated into groups of 8. And by the end of this training, I was recruited. They basically said, you should be doing what we do. So I was recruited by this training company, and I started working for them a year later, crisscrossing the globe, doing what I do. And then my boss, a couple years into my tenure there, said, I knew I wanted to hire you from the second you walked into the room. And I was like, well, this could get really awkward, but please tell me more. And he said, you walked in wearing this red dress in a sea of black golf shirts, and you just walked in like you owned the place. And that in itself said something to this person who to take notice of me and say, there's somebody that I want to talk to. So what I tell my clients too, when you show up, how do you show up? Do you show up like you deserve to be there? Do you show up like you are somebody who is credible? Is your collarbone nice and wide? Are you taking up physical space? Or are you that person who's hunched over looking like they're in fear? Because we have lots of research that says those self-focused people, those people who love competitive negotiations, when they smell weakness, they get even more aggressive. So I need my audience members to show up like they deserve to be there, like their battery is fully charged, like they feel really powerful. That in itself will curb a lot of the resistance that you're going to get when you put your proposal on the table, when you ask for something that you deserve or want in that room. You're going to get a lot less resistance in the way that you just physically show up. And so I ask people to think about, where do you sit in the room? How visible are you? How are you? What does your posture look like? Do you look like you're stiff, or do you look like you feel natural being there in those moments? And how comfortable do you look when those words are coming out of your mouth? Again, another reason to rehearse that kind of stuff. And then when it comes to the person sitting across the table, are you paying attention to the signals that they're sending you? I don't want audience members to get lost in trying to pay attention to what ways are their eyes going. A lot of that stuff about that we read about how to spot a liar, it's not exactly an exact science. And studies show us that even experts get it wrong 50% of the time. So don't use your mental capacity to try and pick up on those subtleties. But what you are looking for are the blips. So all of a sudden they did something different. Maybe they leaned forward. I don't know what that means. It could mean they're leaning forward because they're interested. It could mean they're leaning forward because they want to interrupt you. It could mean they're leaning forward because they're super excited about what you have to say. You've got to read the whole context. So pay attention to the blips. And when you have that sound mind, when you're having a say less moment, that's when you can start to analyze and interpret the blips. But if you're so consumed with that fight or flight response, that stress response, it's going to be very hard to observe any of the things that they're doing across the table when it comes to that nonverbal stuff. And it means it's going to be even harder when they're telling you the verbal stuff, because we give away a lot of verbal clues as well. But people will give you some sense. You won't be able to necessarily articulate it, but your subconscious is going to be picking up on a million little micro cues that your gut instincts will be able to read better if you've had that sound mind, say less meditative moment when you're in there.
Yeah, I think, as I'm listening to you sharing that, self-awareness is the word that comes to mind for me. It's really paying attention and being present in the moment, being aware of yourself, but also being aware of your situational awareness, right?
Yeah.
Being aware of your surroundings and paying attention to those blips and those subtleties, and maybe going through, which we can do very quickly, but thinking about, okay, you may be trying to get some clarity on that. What could that mean? What does that mean? What are they possibly trying to say to me? And really digging deep into that so we know how to take our next step or say the next thing that we have to say. But I think practice is critically important. One of the things that I started to do years ago was to actually record my voice, to record things that I was going to say, and also video the same as well, because I wanted to see what was my body saying, right? Did my body actually match my words? Was there congruency there? And my pacing and the way that I speak, those sorts of things. Now, I'm not suggesting that everyone need to do that and dig that deep and look at every single nuance, but I think as you get further into this, you become more comfortable with it. And those little subtleties can make, it's like the small things become the big things, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's that practice makes progress. It's you're getting your brain used to these things so that you can be more self-aware in the moment. The more preparation you put into stuff, the more space you have in your brain to focus on the other things instead of trying to figure out, what do I say now? How am I going to handle this? You've done that. You've done that work in advance. So free up that space for your brain.
Absolutely. Now, you had talked about mindset a few moments ago. And you shared something that I felt was important. I would love it if you would give all of us one powerful mindset shift that can change everything in a negotiation. So just one thing that we can do, should be thinking about, a way to shift our mindset.
I mean, for me, the one line that I feed my clients all the time is, you deserve to be there. You've earned your place in that room. You've earned their time on the calendar. Like, you are there for a reason. So show them what that reason is.
That's a fantastic one. That truly is. So my friends, I hope that you are paying close attention to this. Honestly, I would take that. I would put that on an index card. I keep high-level notes on index cards, and keep that in front of you. Because one of the biggest things that I see, Fotini, I don't know if this is something that you run across, but often many of the clients that I work with, there are deep-rooted self-value, self-worth, self-esteem challenges. And if you don't feel that you deserve to be in that room, or that you deserve to be sitting at that table, that's going to affect everything that you do. It's going to affect the way that you show up to the world, the way that you communicate, the way that you stand, the way you present yourself. So know what Fotini just said. Write that on an index card. You deserve this. You've earned this place. So I love that. So Fotini, there are questions that can really influence how we choose to navigate in the world, and that can also influence the decisions that we make moving forward. What are one or two bigger, meatier questions that you're asking yourself today? Things that you're contemplating on deeply. Could be about life in general, could be about business, negotiation, but just things that are really important to you. Deep questions.
I mean, for me, I have been so passive about my career so far. And I say that it's been a blessing, in that I've just been saying yes to stuff. I've been saying yes to a book deal because HarperCollins came to me with it. I said yes to teaching at my alma mater because they approached me for it. I said yes to this crazy consulting job. I said yes to clients who said, hey, when are you going to start your own business and come back and work with us? So I have been saying yes to so many wonderful things. I ask myself, what more do I want? What else do I want? Because I've been saying yes to things, but I've never actually looked beyond that, because there's so many more things I haven't even attempted to pursue. And I tell my clients the same thing. I tell my audiences, don't just look at what's in front of you, but what can they afford to do? How do you open up the value proposition? And so I'm challenging myself these days to go, what else is out there that hasn't been brought to my attention yet, that I should be seeking out to improve my life and add even more value? That for me has been taking up a lot of space in my brain recently.
Okay, so I have to pull on one thread in regards to that. Since you're asking that question, and it's a big question, are you journaling on that? What are you doing with the information that, you're asking, you're contemplating, you're getting information back? What are you doing with it? And then what is the next action step that you're going to take?
I mean, that's a great suggestion. I probably should be journaling on it. I have been talking about it in therapy with my therapist, and I think that helps, just saying it out loud and having a sounding board dig through that with me. I actually watched a webinar recently where they gave the advice to have a conversation with your future self using AI. So that's on my to-do list. I've actually put time in my calendar because my birthday's coming up soon. I'm like, by the time my birthday comes around, it'll be a great reflective time for me to think about what do I want for future birthdays. And so I'm planning this conversation with AI future self. And I think that's going to help me also map out, what is it that this future self, how is this future self feeling? What are the things that I need to do in order to get there? What are the immediate action steps that I can take? That's sort of the big plan at the moment that's been looming large.
Beautiful. So I have someone I'm going to introduce you to. I will reach out to you when we finish recording this podcast. I think it's
Awesome.
someone who could be very beneficial for you in that regard. So I've got a challenge that I'm going to ask of you. Then I've got one final question. Here is the challenge, if you will, or the ask. I would love it if you would give all of us, including me, a challenge. What is one thing that you would challenge us to do starting today?
What would I challenge you to do starting today? I often tell my audiences when we start our sessions to think about one opportunity that you might not have chased, that you may have backed out on, or one thing that you're proud of that you really want to put a spotlight on, that you want to advocate for yourself on. And so I would tell your audience and yourself, like, what are you really proud of? And how can you make sure people know about that? How can you use that to charge your battery and get more out of life from it?
Okay, fantastic. Fantastic challenge there. And for my friends, all of you that are watching and listening right now, I hope the two words that are coming out of your mouth right now are challenge accepted. So take advantage of that one. And Fotini, here is my final question to you. So what is one of the greatest gifts that life has given you that you didn't realize at the time?
This is going to sound bizarre, but it's a broken relationship with an employer. It was an eye-opening moment with an employer that I was heartbroken at the time, but it lit a fire in me to do things that I didn't know I was capable of. It's the reason why I have this platform today and why people are seeking out my advice. So at the time it was devastating because it was the end of what I thought was going to be a fantastic relationship for a long time, but it really kickstarted so much more in my life. So I think that was a real gift.
Okay, very good. I think it's fantastic that you're able to look at it from that lens. I think that's outstanding. Fotini, I want to thank you so very much for joining us today on Business Minds Coffee Chat. This has been such a fantastic conversation, full of amazing insights. Your energy just lights me up. I know this is exactly how you show up on stage. Like I said, it is how you write as well. I'm grateful for you and thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me and for the wonderful questions. I certainly hope it helps your audience.
I know it will. And for all of you, thank you so very much for watching and for listening. And I do have a quick favor to ask. Would you please take just a moment to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify? That helps our podcast continue to grow and attract incredible guests, just like you saw here today. And to enjoy more episodes, all you need to do is visit jscherbusinessconsulting.com, click that podcast button. And until next time, keep learning, keep growing. Make sure you run out and buy a copy of Say Less, Get More, and apply the lessons you learn. And we'll see you on the next Business Minds Coffee Chat. Take care, everybody.